First, I want to say thank you, my Aunt Beta. So my recollection of how this all got started was my Aunt Beta. We were talking at Christmas dinner. She said, I'm going to tell my group about you and your book, and we're going to come try to get you involved. Next thing I know, Gary called me, and then Eli called me. So it's really an honor to be here with you all. And also to thank my wife, Monica, for being there the whole time and being my biggest supporter. The thing I would also have to say from the very beginning is how impressed I am with this group. I don't have as much gray as Gary, but I feel like I've been around it long enough to say that I don't know that I've ever seen such an integrated group come together. So I think there's something very special about what you guys have created here. And I think that at a fundamental level has to be part of what happens in order to tackle an issue such as racism, that it can't be seen as just a black issue, but that white segments of society really have to take ownership of race as being an issue in our own minds and in the way that we interact with others. So I think this crowd is a testament that that actually can and is happening here. So I think that's fabulous. So quickly, I'll just kind of give a little bit of an idea of how I'll be speaking today, a little bit of outline, and I'm trying to condense the book into a version that's not going to take forever. So if it ends up where I'm going on too long, feel free to kind of tap me on the shoulder, and I'll try to condense it even more. So the first thing I'll do is I'll share a couple personal stories, and I'll use that as a platform to discuss race as a concept. So kind of generally talking about how race is produced, how it exists, and how it continues to affect everybody in the process. In terms of scariness, my wife, I was kind of talking about what I was going to be saying, and she says, "You're not going to use any of those crazy words, are you?" So I'm going to keep the scary kind of psychoanalytic stuff, to a minimum, and just speak plainly as much as I can. So I'll start with kind of an overview of race, and then what I'll do is I'll go into, for my book, as part of my dissertation, I interviewed 5 black men who all came from inner city poverty, and now they're working as professionals. And so I kind of chronicled their life story, trying to really pay attention to what was their experience like throughout their whole journey. How did race, and also gender and social class, but for tonight I'll primarily be focusing on race, how did that impact how they thought of themselves, and also what happened as they transcended from an urban setting to more mainstream in their professional lives and their experience with that. Because I think that sometimes is a very overlooked area of what it might be like to be a member of an oppressed group. Even once you've reached a certain social standing, you can say, okay, well, you're good, you've made it, you're doing well in life. But the kind of injuries of racism persist, on a daily basis. So I think that's an important kind of myth to debunk, that once a person is kind of quote unquote successful, that they're able to not be affected by racism. So I'll use those 5 stories as a way of kind of fleshing out some ideas related to race. So I'll jump in with a couple of stories from my own life. When I was in high school, my best friend was an African-American kid that was my age. He lived in housing projects in Omaha, Nebraska. And so I was going to see him one night to hang out, and as I pulled into the housing projects complex, a police officer flagged me and pulled me over, and he's, can I see some ID? And so I show him some ID, and he said, well, you're from 54th Street, what are you doing over here? I said, well, I'm seeing my friend. He's like, well, how do you know somebody over here? I said, well, we go to prep together. It's like a prep school in Omaha. So, in my whole time of working in this area, I've never met anybody from here that went to prep. So he didn't believe me. So I had to knock on my friend's door, and he's come out, and he says, yeah, what's the problem? And so right there, if you kind of break that down, what's happening is 54th Street really was only 2-3 miles at the most away from where this guy lived. And so I actually lived closer to him than I did to some of the more wealthier, wider suburbs. So really, in terms of geography, what am I doing here was more of I was out of bounds racially. You know, that you're not supposed to be on this side of town, not because of the actual distance, but because there's a psychological barrier of where do whites occupy, where do blacks occupy. And so right there you see a division in the minds where it's created as you don't belong here. A black kid from the projects and a white kid from a different neighborhood are not supposed to be together. And so you see the way that the mind creates certain distinctions of, you know, like oil and water, like this is not supposed to happen. And then it's reinforced when people in power, and even any of us, we replicate those stereotypes and those boundaries, which I think is part of why this group is so impressive, is that you see that those boundaries are not actually in existence. There's a coming together. The other thing is the boundary around what is a black kid from the projects doing at prep. That there's a certain place he's supposed to occupy in our culture that he was living outside of that. And so the cop says, well, no, you're supposed to stay here. And so you see where race, again, is produced as if being black means you can't be educated or you're not supposed to be successful, that there's a way of kind of keeping people siloed in certain segments. Now, the other thing, too, that happens is in our minds, we come across disgruntled, me and my friend, like, you know, this kind of white oppressive cop, you know, the cops do this, cops do that, because we're also creating in our minds another stereotype, which is that all cops, all white people with badges are oppressive. And so we run, because I've had other experiences where I've been pulled over, same situation, and nothing negative happened. It was a normal exchange. But in our minds, that doesn't feed another narrative, which is that, you know, white people are this, black people are this. And so I think the idea of narratives being fixed in our mind and that we expect something to happen and then we sort of kind of push in that direction. And so when it doesn't fit the narrative, we kind of dismiss it as, oh, well, never mind, that doesn't fit what my mind is telling me about white people or black people. And then the second story is kind of pretty similar. In college, I was with another friend of mine who's black, and then there was another black guy in the back seat, and I was in the passenger seat. Get pulled over again in a suburb of Detroit. Two white police officers. They say, you know, my friend says, well, you know, why did you pull me over? He, you know, kind of looks, oh, well, you have a, you know, cracked windshield. You know, stuff that happens quite often is there's kind of a made-up reason to get pulled over. And so what the police officers did, they said, okay, to my friend, can I see your ID? They asked the guy in the back, can I see your ID? And they asked me, are you okay? So, I mean, this is stuff that happens, and, you know, didn't ask me for ID or anything. And so, again, what's being produced there is that I, as a similar color to these white officers, am there to be protected. They're protecting me, are you okay? And the guys that I'm with, that I'm actually, you know, friends with, I'm being protected from them. So they're the ones, we're protecting you from black men, and you as a white man are to be protected. And so again, even though we're close, me and my friends, but we're being divided and put into different categories. Who gets protected? Who are we protecting against? And so I think, you know, I use those stories. I mean, these are day-to-day examples that I think people, especially people of color, experience all the time. So there's nothing necessarily unique to the stories, but to show, again, examples of how people are put into boxes. So when we're born, we're said, okay, you're a boy or you're a girl, you're black or you're white, you're rich or you're poor, and then based on whatever category you fit, there's these attributes that are sprinkled onto you. Okay, well, you're white, so there's benevolence, there's intelligence, there's capability, there's affluence. Oh, you're black, well, you're going to be aggressive, you're going to be probably not so smart, maybe you'll have a vibrant sexuality. You know, there's ways that we divide, and then these categories, it's almost taken as common sense, like that's actually how people are, versus that's a way that the mind continues to create and perpetuate attributes that really don't fit. And so I think when when someone gets pulled over, they say, well, you know, why are you pulling me over? I think the outrage is related to you're putting something on me that doesn't belong. And I don't want that to be put on me. I want to just be a person. I don't want you to see my skin color and then tell me what I am because of that. And I think there's a certain offensiveness oftentimes in white people when they hear you're racist. And I think what is happening in that situation is that they're experiencing in a minuscule way what it's like to be a person of color, that something's being put on them that doesn't resonate with their experience of who they are. They say, well, look, I'm not racist. I have, black friends, or I don't think anything negative of black people. There's a defensive because it's like, wait, I don't want to be labeled something that doesn't fit me. But I think that can be used as a way of empathizing with what it is like to be a person of color in everyday America, where something's being put on you that doesn't fit you. And the other thing too, and this is where we kind of get into a little bit of the psychoanalytic stuff, is that our minds are, some of it is in our awareness, what we think, what we're aware of, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we may act out or play out that we are not necessarily conscious of. So if you think about driving a car, you might say, God, I got in the car next day, I knew I was at home. There's a lot that's going on unconsciously that's getting sorted out without us being aware of it. And I think the same thing happens when it comes to race and really gender, anything that our minds have been kind of indoctrinated to see people in certain ways based on how they look. And then we say, okay, well, this person's a white person, so there's a common sense idea I know about them. I know they're pretty safe, they're not going to harm me. Oh, this person's a black man, I better stay my distance, he's scary. Again, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily agree with that consciously. They say, well, no, I don't think any of that. But in action, you see it. And that was something I think throughout my journey that had really startled me. When I started to look into my own mind, like how I was organizing experience. So another quick story to kind of demonstrate this is my wife and I were actually robbed at gunpoint some years back by 3 young black men in Detroit, in the neighborhood that we lived in at the time. After that incident, the store owner was black. There was a black guy in the coffee shop that actually went and found where these guys were that had robbed us. There was a black post office worker who actually went and knew where these guys were staying at. Then the black sheriff, black police officers were able to intervene and actually catch the guys and assist us in getting our stuff back. The husband of the store owner came who was black and was comforting us. But the funny thing is, we didn't walk away from that experience saying, God, black people are so helpful. They really are so compassionate. I mean, they didn't have to do any of that. They look at all these black men that helped us and how kind they are and how self-sacrificing they are. We went away saying, oh wait, we're the black guys that we got to be careful because and we were processing this, me and my wife, and almost like we felt ashamed by what we were noticing. Was that what happened is that these 3 men that are they're unique individuals. But our minds were clustering them with stereotyped image of what young black men do or what black men do. And our minds were not doing the same with all the other black men that we encountered that day. And so I think, again, it's a very difficult process when you start to pay attention to how you organize experience, how you may act leery towards someone, because especially if you're, let's say, kind of a progressive-minded or liberal white person, you may not want to, you're used to thinking, no, everybody's equal, I believe in that, I'm even here at this event to stand up for equality. But then in our minds, like I said, even unconsciously want to reproduce and define people based on what we've been kind of indoctrinated with. So I think that is one thing that's important to do, is continue to pay attention to subtle ways that our minds replicate racism. Because I think the easy thing is to say, this is a society problem, but society is not something out there. Society is in here. We are society. People are society. So there's not like racism out there or some entity. Society is people. All of us make up society. And so to take ownership of how are we producing this is a very important thing and a very challenging thing to do. And so that, like I said, is kind of one story where, and once you start to pay attention to it, you see it all the time. And like I said, it can be kind of horrifying when you want to see yourself as someone who's like somehow outside of racism. And the tricky thing is racism is tough because when you think of racism, we typically think of like explicit kind of like KKK members, people that actually would say, I think black people are inferior. But if you think of how we all racialize things, that exists in all of us. And again, that's a hard thing to grapple with and accept, but I think that is a way that things can move forward. So that's kind of one thing to consider when you're thinking about race. The other thing too, what happens not necessarily in our awareness, is there's processes that happen between people. And so when our mind is trying to make sense of things, when we don't want to think something about us, we don't want to know something about ourselves that is painful or shameful, we want to say it's coming from that other person. And so this happens in any type of interaction, any type of close, intimate relationship. It's going to happen. You know, people are married, you might see like you get into these maybe disagreements and you see like you kind of putting it on them. It happens all the time. But I think when you think about race and societally, it's also happening. So an example is, aggression is a really good example. There's the kind of angry black man stereotype. So if you look at, let's say, the police killing an unarmed black man, a common response to that is, well, what was he doing to provoke that? It's very rare that aggression is located on the officer who actually did the killing, because it doesn't fit. White people are not aggressive. They're the victims of aggression. They're not the aggressors. And so again, it's because again, our minds are like used to these kind of trenches of how do we sort of experience. And so with aggression gets put on the other person. And then what also happens is, because you put aggression on the other person, you become scared of them. And so that's when you get like, oh, I'm going to clutch my purse, or I'm going to walk to the other side of the street. And then you actually induce in the other person, like, well, why are you doing that? And then you say, well, see, look how angry he is. And so you see how there's these different interactions that actually promote the exact behavior that you're afraid of. And so the guys that I interviewed, I mean, they would all say, you know, I would go to school, I'm ready, you know, first day of class, and I walk to school and everyone's walking the other side of the sidewalk. Like, and then they said, well, they kind of get mad, and you're now becoming what they're afraid of in a way that it kind of keeps that cycle going. And then they act even more scared, which then provokes even more anger, then provokes even more justification that look how angry they are. And so this happens, you know, and if you imagine an intense situation like pulling somebody over, I mean, these things are happening, you know, a mile a minute in a way that's not being thought of in an intense situation, a scary situation. So you have inflamed situations. So you have that, like I said, in extreme cases where you see, like I said, people being killed by police, but then you have it in day-to-day interactions in a more subtle way. The other thing you have is what's called like kind of theft of qualities of other people. So you don't have that quality, it's mine. And so, for example, another common experience is you have, let's say, a black person in a prestigious professional educational program or in a professional position. There's often a tendency to say, well, how did they get here? You know, I bet affirmative action, or, you know, they probably got here to fill some sort of token. Because what that does is it says, it's not your intelligence, it's not your hard work, it's not your dedication, it's something that I have given you. And so what feels good has been gifted from the white society, and what's good in that black person has been taken from them and again attributed. So you see how like different components are segmented and separated, and then that's like how it settles out. Because the other thing with that is if to kind of acknowledge, well, what if, the other way of looking at that is that black man or black woman actually had to work twice as hard. Maybe they're actually twice as intelligent, or had to work even harder, or had to even persevere even more. There is that risk inferiority. And so people don't want to feel inferior, so there's a way of trying to tilt it back. And so I think there's always a managing of shame, inferiority, guilt, because that's another thing is when I teach students, these are clinicians, therapists, I have a course on where they have to each present on their own racial biases and social class biases. And so when they're sitting with a patient from either someone that's similar or different, how their mind starts to make sense of them, even before they know them. And these are therapists. I mean, they're used to thinking about their mind. They're used to thinking about the psychology. The anxiety is palpable in the room because it's so scary to confront one's guilt, one's shame. And so, again, these processes lead us to do, like I said, certain things such as, oh, maybe they got here because of affirmative action. And then the third process I'll describe interpersonally is what's called like role responsiveness. And so when you kind of nudge somebody into certain roles, for example, one of the guys that I'll be discussing in med school, he said, they suggested that I become president of the Minority Association. And he said, well, why of the Minority Association? Why not of the entire student body? And so in a way, I'm nudging you to where you belong. You know, you belong, you don't belong above everybody, you belong here. And then what that also does, if a person is not mindful, it can really infiltrate their sense of self-esteem. Well, maybe I don't belong as a president. Maybe I'm really not so good. Maybe really these people are smarter. And so that's a real challenge of like, where do people fit in? Or, and so I think that's, you know, a concept that people are pretty familiar with. I think of like, maybe whites getting kind of a leg up, like boosted up because that's their role, and then more people of color getting kind of nudged in the other direction. You know, just like the story I said, you know, well, look, you stay in the projects and you stay out there with the prep kids. You know, there's kind of, look, you guys go and fulfill the roles that belong. And so with all this happening, we are also trying to make sense of who we are. So you're brought up and you're born into a certain situation, and then you're sprinkled with all these characteristics. Well, this is you, this is you, this is you. And then as you grow, yourself is saying, well, is this me? Or wait, maybe I'm not this. And so I think that tension of trying to develop a sense of who you are is also constantly making sense of who am I, but also who am I as it relates to my race, who am I as it relates to my social class, my gender, my affluence, my occupation. And so I think for the book and in my interviews, a lot of it I was trying to see, like, how did these guys process all that? You know, I mean, they're going from these very difficult situations and they're transcending into the kind of American dream. But as that's happening, they're really facing all these dynamics. And how does a person combat that? How do they make sense of that as that's happening? Was you know, really what I was trying to get at as I did the interviews. And so with that kind of as a foundation, I'll try to launch into the stories of these 5 guys. And I'll go pretty quickly just for the interest of time. And then you know, if people have questions and feedback, I'm happy to speak more. But what I did was I interviewed all these guys 5 different times for an hour. And then I wrote up basically what I had heard and what I was how I made sense of it. And then I showed them, I had them read what I wrote. Because again, I think one issue is if you have, you know, even in my best interest, there's a chance that I may be misunderstanding or I may not get something right. So I really wanted to make sure that this was a story that felt like, look, yeah, that's my story. You're writing something that feels true to me. And so that was kind of the way the interview process worked. So what I'll do is I'll share these guys, a bit of their background, a bit of kind of who they are, and then some of the themes that I picked out throughout their life in terms of what felt important to them, what was meaningful for them about their journeys. And so the first guy I'll be talking about is Rico. He grew up in Detroit and now is in educational leadership, actually here in Western Michigan. He grew up as the product of an extramarital affair, and so already he kind of was brought into the world as not necessarily being wanted in some ways, not only as a black man, but also just within his own family constellation. He had 2 older brothers that were quite a bit older than him that were in and out of jail, kind of active in what he labeled the street life. He had a sister that was pretty high achieving, but she was very gifted academically, and he actually wasn't. So he felt kind of like, I don't really want to be like my brothers, but I don't feel competent enough to be like my sister. So he felt potentially kind of like lost in the wind. But his mom actually got him involved in a prominent church in Detroit. And he said, you know, what was happening there was, it was a predominantly African-American church. He said he's like 80% of the men there had professional degrees. They were very successful. And his church actually explicitly taught messages related to black pride, black power, masculinity. I mean, there was rites of passage for young black boys coming into manhood. So throughout his early years, instead of being indoctrinated with kind of societal messages of not being good enough, for him, actually, this was unique to him, is he was being really filled with a sense of that he was special, he was powerful, he was strong. He really left going to college with a very positive sense of who he was as a black man due to these men in the church. And it kind of worked in a reciprocal way that he would look up to these men as, man, like, I mean, when I talked to him, he was just full of life about talking about these guys. Like, man, I just wanted to be like them. I wanted to be in that inner circle. And then they're taking interest in him also was internalized as, man, like, there must be something about me that's special, that is good enough. And so he really was able to launch into his college education, is basically saying, look, there's nothing for me besides being successful. Like, I need to go to college. I need to be a professional because that's what the path has been laid out. That's what I want to be. And so he went into the mainstream, from basically an all-black neighborhood in Detroit into college. And then he said, but then when I got to college, it was a different world. He's like, we're in class, and they're not talking about black men are powerful, black men are strong. They're saying black men are, on welfare. They're just, they have their pants to their butts. They're out committing crimes. And he said, it would infuriate him. And he would say, I want to burn this building. Like, he would get so mad, again, at being misunderstood and misrepresented and feeling that where he came from was being misrepresented. So that could really injure a person. But what he did is he said, you know what, I'm going to really infiltrate this system. And so that, I think, psychologically, to take what feels like a passive, oppressive experience and turn it around and feel like, no, I'm going to be an agent in all this, was a very important thing for him and all the other guys that I interviewed. So he had this kind of concept of himself. And so, like, the mind will create different fantasies and narratives about the self to keep us kind of going, keep us feeling alive. And so the thing that he came up with was, I'm kind of like the Robin Hood of knowledge. Like, I'm going to go into white America. I'm going to figure out, like, the power structures. I'm going to figure out what they know. And then I'm going to bring it back to my community and empower. And so he really felt like he was kind of on a mission to uplift and try to redistribute power. But one of the ways that he had to do this was, he said, what I would do is I would stay clean shaven. I'd take my earrings off, I would dress up, and I would go because I want to be able to fit in. And then he said, but I'm still doing all this, and I still but people would clutch their purses when they see me. And so he would get very frustrated with trying his best to try to fit into a system that was still treating him as if he was a criminal. And so that was a very difficult experience for him, and continues to be of how does he navigate the professional world. The other thing, this happened I would say most of the guys that I talked to had some degree of this, where he said, you know what, it's crazy because when I try to go talk to young black kids where I'm from, they say, well, no, you're not like us, man. Like, you don't even know what this is about. He says, well, what are you talking about? Like, I'm from here. They said, well, no, look how you dress, look how you talk, look how you act. And so I think that can be one of the potential losses of upward mobility, is that what feels most intimate and connecting to a person can actually become lost and disconnecting if they start to feel like, oh, you're not like us. Which is part of the problem of when, in our culture where blackness is defined as being not successful, because that way when you become successful, it's like, oh, well, you're not like us. And so that's something that everybody buys into in very problematic ways. So that way it's like, well, am I successful or am I black? And I think that was a challenge for a lot of the guys, was to be able to say, look, I'm both. Like, there's no, why can't you be both? And so that was something that he and, like I said, the other guys had to try to find a way to integrate those two concepts. But sometimes the people around them would have a difficult time. It's like, well, dang, I'm not wanted out here. People are scared of me. But then when I go back home, people are acting like I don't belong here either. And that living in between those two worlds was really a very painful experience for a lot of guys that I talked to. And the other thing, too, that he was able to do, and again, I think this was common with a lot of the guys that I interviewed, was finding belongingness. So, for example, joining a fraternity where there's other professional black men who went to college, or being active in NAACP, or joining the Masons. that was the way where he said, okay, look, this is where my worlds combine. Like I feel like I can be who I am. I can be in these professional social groups, but I can still be accepted as still a black man from Detroit. And so I think that finding a way to feel like you connected, you belonged, was very important for everybody. I mean, it's important for all of us, but these guys have particular, they had to find particular ways of finding that belongingness and that connectedness. And so I'll launch into the next guy, Rusty. He is in medical school currently. Grew up in a very traumatizing background. He had a number of siblings by different fathers, same mother. His dad was very active in his life, but he had to bounce around from different households, different because of like abuse and neglect. His mother was addicted to drugs. His uncles were in the house selling drugs. He was abused by almost every family member besides his father. Really kind of like what you would think of when you think of a kid in the system, kind of just being bounced around, not really having a solid place to call home, really just embedded in violence and drugs, very, very traumatized, traumatizing situation. But there were some unique things with him and with his situation. One of them was, even though his mom was pretty debilitated by drug use, she had a real sense that, look, you are different. You don't belong here. You're better than all this. And that, he really latched onto that idea that there's something special about him, which can be a difficult thing because, again, if you're better than this or you're above all this, it disconnects you from who your family is, who your community is. And so it can be kind of isolating, but it can also feel kind of empowering because you say, well, I'm going to transcend this, but then who am I? Where do I belong? And so that was something that he struggled with. The other thing is he was very determined. So he said, I saw the Cosbys, and they were this black family with money, and I wanted to be them. And so he said, but I don't know, there's no Cosbys where I'm from. So he said, well, how do I become a doctor? And so he would ask his teacher, well, what do I need to do to become a doctor? She says, well, being a doctor is really hard. So he's okay, well, what do I need to do to become a doctor? He would insist on finding a way kind of out of no way. He had this very determined sense about him that he was going to keep figuring out what he needed to do. And then again, though, once he said, okay, I figured this all out, and then he starts going into more integrated settings, like these youth programs or when he went to college or med school. And again, he's like, well, why are people not picking me for group projects? He said, I thought like we were all in this together, we're all working hard, we're all smart. And he became very disgruntled by still being treated as if he didn't belong. And so again, that common theme occurred very often, and with Rusty in particular. The other thing that people will do when they're traumatized is they will push down emotions. And so you may have someone who has been through a lot but doesn't necessarily feel a lot. And this was something that he really experienced. And in some ways it kind of was adaptive in that he could survive a very traumatic situation. He could survive being in med school and being treated in a kind of oppressive way, and by saying, look, I don't care about all that, I'm just here to become a doctor. But it really caused some issues with him in terms of interpersonally being able to connect with his wife in a more vulnerable way. So that I think is one casualty of when you have to armor yourself so much. Some of the softer, more vulnerable aspects of experience get like thrown away. It's like you no longer have access to them, and that can make a person a little more difficult to feel close to. And so that, I think, sometimes can be a casualty of having to really be in a world where all the time you're trying to position yourself and be armored, is that some of the softer aspects have to get pushed down and buried. The other thing with him when it comes to masculinity was that his uncles really said, look, to be a man, you have to be tough. You have to fight. You have to be fierce. And so he grew up like, look, if someone disrespects me, I'm going to punch them. That's what was celebrated. But then he goes into med school, and he's like, look, I can't go punching everybody that I feel disrespected by. So he had to really say, how can I feel good about myself as a man, how can I stand up for myself in a way that's not going to sabotage what I'm trying to do? And so to try to hold on to the idea of I feel good about myself, I feel powerful, yet I'm not going to do anything that's self-destructive. And so that was a challenge too, is how do you feel strong and powerful, and yet some ways almost feel like you have to be submissive to get by. And so that was another thing that had to be negotiated. The other thing too is that people talked about, Rusty and other guys, was that, okay, when I started going to med school, I wanted to disavow anything that had to do with Detroit. Like, I don't want to be Detroit. I just want to be seen as a competent doctor. So he said, like, I wore Jordans, but when I go to the hospital, I don't wear them. And then throughout his process, he began to say, look, again, why can't I be both? Why can't I be the way I used to be growing up and still be a professional and still be a doctor? And so he said, I started wearing Jordans during rotations because that's who I am. I'm still a competent doctor. That doesn't mean I have to throw away everything that I knew growing up. And so I think that was an important part of his journey, was to be able to say, look, I'm going to keep these two worlds together. They don't need to be separate. They don't just because people are saying they should be separate, I want to keep them together. So that was another important aspect for Rusty. And then I'll move into the third guy, Bobby. Bobby was the only guy I interviewed that didn't grow up in an all-black setting. He grew up on the east side of Detroit. So all the other guys, their really first experience with what felt like racism was when they would go off into college, when they basically interacted with white people maybe beyond their teachers. It was, okay, what is it like to be in a classroom where maybe it's a majority white? Where Bobby grew up in what he said was predominantly a Polish and German neighborhood. And then as he grew up, white flight, like the whites would move out into the suburbs, and the neighborhood kind of changed into working class, black, and then the neighborhood started to deteriorate, where he said a lot of gangs moved in, drug culture moved in. But he was still going to the Catholic schools in the area that were still all white, and so he was getting called the N-word. His mom was getting called a B. Really terrible, traumatizing experiences that he was subjected to as a young age. And now his parents, he defined them as kind of hardcore. So he said that they would say, look, man, it doesn't matter what you're going through. You need to get up and you're going to go to school the next day. Because he would say, look, I don't want to go to school. I'm tired of facing all this. They said, look, you got to go out there. And so his parents really kind of kept him going. But he said one of the things was he never got to process the pain of what he was going through. And I think that's another casualty when you're spending so much time just trying to make it and stand up for yourself, is that some of the pain and trauma that's occurring never gets digested. It's almost like a luxury to be able to say, man, this hurts. This doesn't feel good. Because you're like, nope, I got to keep going. And so that was a really painful aspect. What he did was he was very interested in history. So his grandfather would tell me stories of growing up and having run-ins with the KKK, and he'd read black magazines that would highlight different prominent black figures, and he would say, man, like, if our ancestors did all this, there's no reason I can't make it too. And so he had, even though he was facing this constant like assault on who he was at school, he had like a psychic reservoir of no, you are strong, you're capable. You look at what you come from. Not look where you come from in a negative way, but look at all the strength that runs through your veins. And so he was really able to use his history in a way that kind of shored up who he was, which was a very, I think, powerful way for him to try to navigate that. The interesting thing too so Bobby had the kind of inverse experience of the other guys, because the other guys, they said, okay, we grew up around all black people, and that was just what it was. And then when we went to college, we got started treating in a way that we weren't used to. Where Bobby grew up in a way where he was used to being treated with explicit racist actions by other people. When he got to college, he said, man, I found my black community. He's like, I joined a fraternity. I felt at home. So he had actually a reparative experience in college, because he was almost already armed against the worst of what he had already experienced. So it was not a new thing for him to be in a mainstream setting what felt good to him was I could actually find my group, and so that was actually like a really like a positive experience for him, was actually going to college. The other thing, again, this is similar with all the guys, was he said, to be a professional black man, you have to have many faces. He's like, it's a chess game. Like, who am I going to be in this meeting? And who am I going to be when this person comes at me wrong? Or who am I going to be when I go home? And so he said, again, he's like, I don't want to come across as the angry black man, but I also don't want to come across as not being assertive and not being able to be a leader. And so I think that, like, how do you manage being competent and also trying to pay attention to, well, how is this going to be received? So he said, he would have to really navigate that internally and be very conscious of, okay, well, I don't want to go too far in this direction, but then I don't want to go too far in this other direction. And so that was something that he also described as a meaningful aspect of his experience. So there'll be two more people I'll talk about. The fourth one is Silas. He's an engineer, grew up in a place called Highland Park. It's kind of like a city inside of Detroit, known for extreme poverty and blight. His mom and dad were very active in his life, but his dad was also addicted to drugs. And so he had this experience of, man, my dad is like always at my games, he's really involved. But then, like, there's guys coming at our door looking for money because my dad is on one of his crack binges. And he said, like, trying to negotiate the kind of love for his father and admiration for his father and his disappointment and hurt was a very difficult thing to, because that's hard for all of us, is how do you manage conflicting feelings about a person and conflicting feelings about yourself. And for him, it was such an extreme thing because his dad, like I said, he cherished him so much and he was so hurt by him. His mom was very intense about school. Silas was a star football player, and he said, I brought home a C on my chemistry test, and this is the game of the season. My mom said, you're not playing, and she wouldn't let him play in the game. He said, Mom, this is the game of the season. She said, I don't care. School comes first. And so he had that also in his life. Of his mom was very intensely dedicated to the fact that he would be kind of a scholar first and an athlete second, which, again, when you're talking about race, you often have the black body celebrated, but not the black mind. And so I think his mom was saying, look, no, we're not buying into that. And that's why, you see a lot of stuff with, like, Colin Kaepernick, for example, is that, wait, you're not just using your body anymore, you're using your mind, and you get an outrage associated with that. Because, again, it's very similar to slavery. It's like, okay, we want the body, but we want there not to be a mind. And so that carries over in subtle ways and sometimes not so subtle ways. And so his mom, especially when he started getting recruited by colleges, said, look, if this recruiter's not talking about school and student athletes, I don't want any part of it. Like this, you're going to be a student and then an athlete. And so he actually carried that on. People were like, man, why are you studying so much? You're going to go to the NFL. He said, look, man, like if that happens, that'll be great, but I'm not going to have that be my only plan. And so he was very, he really kind of continued that on, his mom's kind of push. The thing about how with Silas is he had a kind of, he had part of him that felt very like, I'm the man, and then a part of him that felt very insecure, which often is the case, is that there's like a hidden part of the self that feels very insecure, and then the part that tries to shore that up by saying, look, no, I can do this. And so when he would have opportunities, he would, for example, go, like he got the opportunity to go to the school in North Carolina for high school, but it was predominantly white school where his uncle lived, where, it was a better school system, safer neighborhood. He said, when I got there, though, man, I felt like I was ill-equipped. Like I didn't know the stuff that they were talking about in terms of math. So he said, I wanted to go back home. When he went to college, he said, I want to be at HBCU where I feel more at home. When he went to, start working as an engineer, he'd say, I would stay calm. I would stay quiet in meetings. I may know the answer, but I felt like, I don't know. I want to kind of hold myself back. So he was very inhibited, despite, he had to really work to be able to keep his confidence alive because he said, I don't know, man, like, is this really me? And so again, that's another, another injury that happens, I think, when you live in a world that says you're not supposed to be competent, is that there's a part of the mind that starts to believe, like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe I really don't belong here. And so that was a real struggle for him to be able to say, no, I do belong here. And so he had the same experience where over time he started saying, look, no, I'm going to grow the beard back out. I'm going to start wearing my own type of clothes because, I can be an engineer and be, who I feel is like my original self. And so again, that kind of keeping all his versions of himself at play at the same time was another, struggle for him, just like it was for the other guys. The other thing that he really used in terms of his kind of way of motivating himself, and this often is the case, is that when you suffer painful experiences, so he said, we used to boil water to take baths. That's a painful experience. You feel helpless, and one way to feel like you can do something about it is to, again, turn yourself into more of an active person. It kind of wards off helplessness. So what he says, look, maybe I'm going through this, but my kids will never have to face this. And so that was always in his mind of, look, I'm going to leave a legacy for my kids. My kids are not going to be ashamed of me. I'm not going to be a drug addict. They're going to have a good Christmas where they can get what they want. So the painful things about his experience, he said, my kids are not going to have to face that. So that was like a constant kind of motivator in his mind of kind of a reparations through his own legacy. And the other thing with him, he always was kind of constantly outrunning like poverty. It was like poverty was back here, and he's like, look, I can't let up. I got to keep going. I got to keep working hard. I got to keep being better because I don't want to go back to that. And so he was always in overdrive. And even when I interview him, he's like, people ask him like, when's enough going to be enough? He's like, never, because there was this feeling of, if I don't keep going, in my mind, it felt like the pain of what I've went through was going to catch up to me, and also I may end up back in the circumstances of my childhood. So he was really motivated to kind of escape those situations. And then the last person I'll talk about is a lawyer named Marcus. He grew up single mother. His brother had special needs, and then his sister, he said, was kind of doted on as being the only girl. He said, man, like I just felt like I never got enough love. Like my mom was always working, my dad wasn't around, and so I felt so hungry for recognition and attention. So he said, I started getting into fights, and then I'm like recognized. People are talking about me. He's like, but then I realized, that's not really helping me because I'm getting in trouble. So he started to then like do good in sports. He's a very charismatic guy. He started to like get involved with like different activities in school, and really became very, like his school became like a second home to him, where he got a lot of his admiration and validation. And then through coaches, he's like, my coaches became kind of like fathers to me. Like his uncle was involved in his life, so that became like a father figure to him. And so he really found a way to feel validated outside of his home life. And one thing for him is he said, okay, once I got to be a lawyer, I didn't want to lose my friends. So he said, we might go out and I have to almost downplay like my income. Like I want to act like, I don't want to be treated like I'm any different from the guys that I grew up with. And so he would say, if I wanted to take a trip, I couldn't, he's like, it's sad because I can't really necessarily take a trip with my friends because they're not necessarily making the money that I'm making. And I don't want them to feel ashamed, and I don't want them to ostracize me. So he said he'd have to like downplay his success a lot. And he said, it's a painful thing. And he said, I didn't really want to make friends with lawyers because I felt like I don't really relate to them. We may be able to speak law with one another, but I feel like we're just completely different from different worlds. And so he really said, I have kept my professional world and social worlds like pretty much completely separated. So he's a guy where, in terms of socially, has not necessarily integrated his social worlds. He kind of keeps them, siphoned off, which again is, I think, a strategy to be able to maintain connectedness from where he's from, but then also his professional status. The other thing is, one way when we go through painful experiences is to find ways to rework them. So, for example, if you see someone who grew up in an abusive situation, it's not uncommon where they may partner with an abusive person. Because you say, God, that hurt, but I'm going to make it better this time. Or if you grew up, let's say, with a mother who was kind of distant you may find someone that's distant and say, well, wait, are you going to love me now? And so that was very apparent with Marcus, where there was like a reworking. So what he would do, every time he had like an accomplishment, he said, okay, well, that's not good enough. I'm going to find the next thing. And so it was almost like he kind of flirted with finding experiences where he wouldn't be good enough, and then he'd do better than it. So it was like once he mastered one thing, he'd go on to the next. And then he would almost, in a way, get energized by people that discounted him. So if somebody, like a lawyer that he was going in opposition with, like didn't email him back or said, kind of downplayed him, he would say, okay, that would make me go and study even harder because I was going to definitely make sure I did better than him in the courtroom. So he would be kind of fueled by the kind of naysayers in a way that, like he said, it would be like I was the Hulk. Like the more negativity I got, the more I kind of bolster myself up. And so he even said sometimes, like when people start to treat me too nicely, I feel like I don't have the energy to like really go at them as hard. And so again, it felt to me like a way of kind of reworking this painful experience of feeling like not good enough. That look, I'm gonna seek out experiences where someone thinks I'm not good enough, and then I'm gonna keep proving them wrong. The other thing too, and this is also fairly common, is the guilt that can happen when a person leaves a situation and ends up having a better life, is that you can feel like a survivor's guilt. So he said, I passed the bar, I was living my dream, and he's like, all of a sudden I was like getting into fights at like the casino, kicking down doors, getting drunk, and he's like, I had to have a conference with myself and say, like, what are you doing, man? And he said, it was like this survivor's guilt. And so what he would do is he'd say, look, I'm just like everybody else. But then if he felt like he was just like everybody else, it felt like it was just luck that got him where he was. And that, again, produced more guilt because it's like, well, I didn't do anything to earn this. But then if he thought of himself as exceptional, then he felt distanced from his friends. So he had to find a way to feel like, look, I'm here because of my talent and my hard work, but I'm also just like my friends too. So he had to find a way of kind of mending that. And the other thing he would do to try to bring his original group with him is in college classes, and I think this is probably almost universal experience for people of color, is kind of speaking on behalf of like black people. So when someone says, well, if you made it, why couldn't the other people? And he'd say, look, man, there's someone that I knew growing up that was twice as good as football as I was, better academically, but he had to drop out of practice because he had to go work a job to pay for the bills to keep the lights on. So he would kind of be a spokesperson to say, look, don't see my success as some propaganda machine that, look, everybody can make it, look at you. So that was another thing that people that I interviewed really had to manage, was just because I made it doesn't mean that you can like ease up on the societal aspects that we all face. And that was common with all these guys. They'd say, look, I made it, but I'll tell you 10 other guys that were just as smart as me that are in prison, that are addicted to drugs, that got killed. And so I think that was a challenge for people, is how to feel good about their achievements, but also reconcile, like, look, why can't more of us make it? Why are these statistics the way they are? And so that was kind of round out the guys I interviewed. And then before we kind of enter the discussion and some interaction, I'll just end with a few comments. I think the main thrust of the book and kind of what I'm trying to talk about is that we all in some ways perpetuate a certain captivity in our minds of what it is to be certain people. And so based on where you are grouped racially, it really constricts who you are, and that everybody's affected by that, and everybody perpetuates that. And so in my mind, the guys that I interviewed were born into a system where they're already pegged as criminals and not lawyers, that they were pegged as the broken, not the doctors that fix, that were pegged as school dropouts, not educators. They were pegged as shiftless, not managers, and then they were pegged as destroyers, not engineers. And so I think if we all work to try to pay attention to the ways that we categorize one another and maybe even categorize ourselves, And I think groups like this are a testament to how that can happen. I think, hopefully down the road, these guys' stories don't have to be so full of hardship. So, thank you.
This is Dr. Goedert's book. There are copies available, and we can make more available for you. Somebody who's going to take care of the books?
Oh, Aunt Lois.
Okay. Aunt Lois? A-U-N-T, Aunt Lois? Amy? So she will be handling the books, but I glanced through some of the book. Don't be overwhelmed by how he starts off, because when he gets into the stories, he makes it so all of us can comprehend it. But it's a scholarly work that has been broken down in parts so we can get a real feel for the people that he's trying to talk about and discuss and their lives and experiences. I'm going to be your moderator tonight. I'm T.A. ElAmin. I was born and raised here in Grand Rapids, grade school, high school, and college. Proud Grand Rapidian South High School. Now, I'm going to take an executive privilege here and introduce the people the way that I would normally introduce. So I'm going to start with Bev Drake. I'm going to start with the ladies, actually. Bev Drake, South High School, Grand Rapidian, born, raised, know this town. Been involved in community work, community social work, community activism for a very, very long time. And my sister-in-law. And last quick point, 10 seconds. She, my 8th grade term paper in terms of what I wanted to be, she was an honor student, English student at Michigan State. She read through my paper and edited and proofed it for me. I got an F on the paper. Only because the lady thought I couldn't, she thought I was reaching too high. I wanted to be an electrical engineer, but I knew the paper was grammatically perfect. So that happened here in the 60s, early 60s in Grand Rapids. We have Mrs. Senita Lenear, transplant, but a Grand Rapidian, Third Ward commissioner, been on the school board. Her husband's a pastor. She's very active in the community. She's concerned about our children. She knows what Doc is talking about here. You mean they put another high school in town? What did they add? A high school, another high school. Our superintendent is a polar bear, too. Dr. Bill Pink, newly installed president of Grand Rapids Community College. We're proud to have you here. And I've seen him at several events that involve young men. He's on the job. He's trying to make things happen and trying to help us get over this hurdle of so-called racism. Rhondo Cooper, Grand Rapids Community College, Upward Bound, one of the young men I've known since he came to town, always been involved with youth, young men, trying to help them cross over into manhood and to become men, become providers, become husbands, and productive members of the community. And I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, but your name rings in this town. Alvin Hill IV. Right? Now, who was the pastor? The third?
My great-grandfather.
The second? The first?
Senior.
Okay, well, I go back that far. And young man, come home, back home to help us build this town. Appreciate you. I'd like to start off and sort of dispense with this question of race. When I saw the title of the book, I wanted to know, how are we dealing with this word? And I found probably 7 meanings in my Random House dictionary. So I'd like for each of you, starting with Mrs. Drake, to expound on your concept of what race is and how we can then, as a group, begin to move it to the bottom of our list of issues that we have to deal with. How can we overcome, collectively, this so-called race classification issue?
First of all, you got to get to know the people. You have to put the fear aside. You have to think deeply about how biased, how prejudiced, how we're all products of conditioning. I'm biased. I'm prejudiced. I'm a product of my conditioning, but I work hard to overcome that. I am aware of it. I do not deny it. I am not ashamed of it. And that is what we have to do. You face it head on. You don't say it doesn't exist. It does. We are all human beings, and again, we are all products of our conditioning.
Next question. I first of all want to start out answering that question by just making this statement. One way you deal with this is by what you're doing tonight. So you can't address a problem unless you admit there is a problem. And so I am very impressed and almost overwhelmed at what I see tonight. Because what happens in areas like where we live is that sometimes you just don't want to talk about the hard things. Because it's easy to go home and sit on the couch and watch what you want to watch and not think about it. Because we can all avoid and we can get through the rest of our life not ever facing this issue. And so if you're never going to talk about it, if you can't talk honestly about it, and when I say talk honestly about it, you have to talk honestly about it from all perspectives. So if you were a white American in this setting, you need to be able to talk about it as well and say, you know what, here's what I think, here's how I feel about it. Because, you know, for us to talk about the black experience, I think is helpful. I think we got to talk about all experiences, though. Because if we're really going to talk about and unpack this topic, all of us have to talk about how we experience from our standpoint. Because if I say, well, here's what that means to me, and here's how I was made to feel, a white individual may say, you know, I didn't know that, because here's what I was going after, here's what I thought. And then we kind of get to our common ground to figure out what each other is going through. And so this type of setting is a huge key to where we need to get to have the hard conversations. And it's not an easy conversation. That's probably why we hadn't gotten very far on it, because no one wants to really deal with that. Because when you start dealing with it, not only does it start cutting to the personal heart, but it also cuts to the heart of your people who you grew up with, and grandma, grandpa, all those people as well. And I don't want to think that about my grandmother, that she had any issues. So to make sure we're able to have the conversation, and the final thing I'll say is that, and this is just my own personal belief, racism is a sin issue. And as long as our Lord was on this earth, he told us, sin is going to be there. Your job as my people is to overcome sin. And so as much as I would love to believe that this is something that one day will go away, totally, much as I'd love to believe that, I know that sin is going to be in this world till the Lord comes again. And therefore, I think we're probably going to be dealing with this. So it means that his people are the answer. And our voices in this discussion need to be heard, and not allow people in this country to tell us that we have a silence in this topic or any of these topics. His people's voice need to be heard.
Well, those two are very extremely hard to follow. So I'm gonna kind of change lanes, and for me, race is a critical factor in my progress and my livelihood as a young black man, not only in West Michigan, but America. And knowing that has equipped me with the skills and the knowledge to navigate as I move forward. And it's imperative of me to also make sure that young men that I mentor are aware of how that influences the settings that they'll be attending. So one thing that some work I do in the community is an etiquette dinner. And for me, it provides somewhat of a equalizer for our young men as they go into these unknown worlds. So when you're sitting at a professional dining experience, you're critiqued about the things that you don't know, what fork you're grabbing, what cup you're drinking out of. And for me, race is at the forefront of a lot of my thoughts as I wake up until I lay down at the end of the day, and it's a reality. So for me to act as if it's not a factor that I have to consider would be ignorant of me. It would be a disservice to myself, and frankly, it could end up being a tragic situation that I didn't plan to have that day. So when it comes to race, it's alive and well, but it is critical to some of our well-being and moving forward.
So I agree with everything that's already been said. Racism, and admitting that racism exists and that people's personal experiences are just that, their personal experiences. One of the things I'd just like to add is that oftentimes when we're having conversations about any ism, you bring in the person who is experiencing or the victim of that ism, and sometimes it's like opening up a wound and pouring salt in it. And so I think that how you address racism is people who are like-minded or who are actually the perpetrators. I think it's their issue to solve. I think they have to come into a space where they're hearing the stories without the victims being present so that they can figure out on their own what are some of the things that they'd like to do to try and address it, as opposed to keep re-victimizing those who are on the other end of racism.
I agree with what Senita said. I agree with everything that everybody has said so far. But I also like to say, and I know this may seem a little funny, but I think that I love, anybody who knows me, they know that I love Reese cups. I love Reese cups. And if you ask everybody in this room right now how they eat a Reese cup, everybody has a different way that they eat Reese cups, right? The sister right here said, oh, yes, 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 right? Some people freeze them. As a matter of fact, I freeze mine. See some shaking heads, right? I take it out, and then I poke out that little center, and I set that little center to the side, then I eat that wheel in 3 bites. And then as whoever I'm sitting next to, as they talk, what I'll do is I'll just put that little piece in my mouth and I'll just kind of close my eyes. So to the question, what I'm saying is that this, one, we have to understand that we all do it different. Just like we eat the Reese cups different, we all experience and we all, I'm gonna say, do this racism thing different. And it's important for us to be respectful and to understand each other's experience as we're going through this piece. And I say we, and I appreciated when the doc got up and he was talking about the song, because we can't continue to talk about the things that are happening out there and then not say that we're gonna solve it here. Out there, we can't do it out there. It's right here. Everything that has happened on the news, some of us and most of us have said, oh man, that poor town, that poor place. No, a lot of those things have happened here. So it's important for us to have those difficult conversations with each other, right? I have to have that difficult conversation with myself every time I look in the mirror. I'm like, who is this dude? Where did he come from? This is not the strong, strapping young guy, you know. I know y'all can't believe that, but I'm just saying, Right. But we need to have those difficult conversations with ourselves. One, we need to make sure that we understand that we have been affected by this thing, right? And then that has altered many of our courses. But then we also have to understand that our spirit in this group, in this room, in our communities, in this town, in this nation have been affected. So we need to have that. We need to keep moving. Thank you.
In my looking for this, the origins of this idea of race, I find out that this was a construct that didn't exist virtually until the 17th century. Race used to be called, a member of a race is a part of a tribe. Well, we may or may not be from the same tribe. But today over here in the West, Dark hue, you're classified into one race. Lighter hue, you're classified into other. And then there's the dominant race and the subordinate race. Everything is divided and is divided along what they say are color lines, but there are no black folk. Dark, I ain't black. There are no white folk. He's light, he ain't white. But we have bought into these color concepts and we're divided along these color lines. Who in here is not a human being? I didn't see a hand. Who in here is not a child of the Almighty Creator? We're all children of the same source. We're all human beings. That means we're all branches off this one human family. We cannot allow in 2017 for people to continue to condition us that I'm superior to you in the blue shirt because I have a degree, or you're superior to me in the black and white dress because you have a lighter hue. It's the humanity in us that we have to try and figure out how to touch. I worked in northern Michigan for a long time. Most times I was the only person of dark hue in the town, and I had to learn to navigate. Some of the people you talk about, they learned, we used to call it back in the day code switching. I knew that I couldn't go to Petoskey or East Jordan, Michigan, and talk like I talk on Division or Jefferson. But people say, well, you're not being who you are. Like some of them said, I'm doing it so that I can get along. People, drop your guards, accept people for what they are, and when they show you what they are, then accept that. And if they're not right, the old folks used to say, feed them with, don't dislike them. Don't fall into hate, because hate will eat you up. But this whole construct of race, I think we need to figure out how to get past. Now, I'd like to know, briefly from each one of you, a specific task, solution, something we could take forward from here and work on as individuals and groups to move past the color constructs, the divisions of race, and see how we can help heal more of these young boys that he talked about, because they came along during the crack age, all of them. They were victims. Their parents were victims. They didn't bring drugs in the United States. They didn't have planes. So we got to get past, figure out how to work with our grandchildren, because a lot of us are lost. A lot of our people are lost. Work with the grandchildren and get them to figure out how to get along, make this world better. Let's start at this end. Right.
I had to do this too because I had to tell Dr. Pink to make sure he's brief. And Senita. All right. And Senita. All right. all right. No, I agree that we need to figure out how to operationalize and how to move forward. That it's not good for us. It's not just good enough for us just to hear the information. We need to figure out how to move out on that information. And I think that I'm a firm believer that we need to start where we're at. You need to start with the group that you contact with and the group that you have that most intimate connections with. If it means that you need to start understanding, first of all, because whenever we think about something like this, the first thing that we want to do is we want to go out and, I'm a therapist also, I'm a counselor too, so I appreciate you, Doc. But the first thing that we want to do is we want to go out and help somebody else. We want to help somebody else. No, right. Here, right. Elder just said, first of all, we need to talk about healing ourselves. So right now, the work probably needs to start with the person that's sitting in your chair, or that's sitting in our chairs. And then we need to work with the small groups of people that we work with. Now, I'm also a firm believer in working with the young people. So I think that we need to start teaching them a different way. I'm not saying that we are beyond change, but it's easier for them to accept a new way of thinking and a new construct. It's going to be easier for them than us. So, but if we start with first ourselves, and then we reach out to our small groups, whether that's in your neighborhoods or your churches, right? And then we keep going. Thank you.
So I'll be shorter than that. I think, so I actually like that point about starting with yourself. And I think to simplify it, I really think that if we start talking and taking action every time we have an opportunity to do so. So frequently we have a lot of opportunities, and then we have a conversation in our heads about how we're going to take action, or should we take action, and then we opt out. And so every time you have an opportunity to speak up, speak out. So when you see something that's going on that's wrong, do it. You have to speak up and speak out, and don't wait on somebody else to do it. That's a simple task that everybody can start doing tonight. And, and just find the right forums to be able to do that. And sometimes it'll be challenging to family members, it may be challenging to neighbors or even people in this room. But the only way we're going to make the change, we talked about admitting it, the only way we're going to make the change is after we've admitted it, doing something about it.
Sheesh. So one thing I think, especially as it relates to young people, is teach them how to use their voice. And when we're speaking about how do we move forward past race, it's in all of it's imperative that all of our young people, from suburban schools to the most inner city, schools, have true curriculum that reflect history. Nowadays, history has been watered down to even change the word slaves to, immigrants. Thank you, Commissioner. So then that's miseducating our children. So then us, as, I guess I'm gonna group myself in this as well, us as elders, when we go to educate our children, there's a gap in information right there. And I think as Rhondo said, starting within our own self, but within our own families, with that true education. And even as Ms. Lenear said, calling out actions as they happen, but sometimes you have to go sit down with some actions that already have taken place. And as you find your new voice and the strength to call out some family members or friends who have maybe done some wrongdoing in the past, just let them know that you're aware of that. And also try to give them some tools to how to reconcile that. So they're not out here just kind of exploring on what to do or living with that guilt as they move forward, but actually try to help them right the wrong.
So I'm going to avoid telling you how I eat my candy bar Twix to save time. But
you break it first.
So I'm a deep believer in mentorship. I'm a deep believer in grabbing, and literally sometimes grabbing our children and say, come along, we got to get this done. And so from a black man perspective, one thing, Dr. Mead, that you said that I think all five of your people that you interviewed, just about almost all five talked about, especially I believe it was Rico, that talked about having those people who were very exemplary, and that he said, okay, I see that. In spite of where I live, I see that. So giving our men and women an opportunity to see what they can be, right? So that they can have a dream and have something to say, you know what? My skin is just as dark as his, and look where he is now. Look where she is now. I can do that. One thing that I am engaging in at GRCC, I will have a shadowing program. And I am bringing as many African-American males from GRPS, from GRCC. They spend a day with me. I want them to shadow me. I want them to spend a day walking around with this, with an individual whose background looked and sounded a whole lot like theirs. At the end of the day, say, so what did you see? And can you see yourself doing this? So we've got to have more of the shadowing. And that doesn't have color lines, friends. If from a white perspective, same thing. But also have those conversations with your young children about this topic. Be able to talk to them about the idea of getting past the idea of what color looks like and saying the value of everybody on God's creation. So the idea of mentorship and the idea of bringing people along with us goes past color lines, goes all the way to what we can do for our kids to give them a vision of what they can be one day.
Mother Wit.
Well, I have to thank my father. He only went to the 10th grade. But he brainwashed me and my brothers and sisters. He told us we could be anything that we wanted to be. He posted up in the house, think, analyze, critique, speak. I believe in brainwashing. My father never did anything other than be a laborer. But I believed what he told me because he was so into it. He so believed it. And, you know, I didn't do so badly, nor some of my brothers or my sisters. But I have to tell you that I'm the oldest one up here. So I have to tell you that you do get tired. You do get tired. You have to armor yourself, and you have to take a reprieve. When I retired 6 years ago, I have to say this, I was so tired of white folks, I didn't want to see none. Because the people that I encountered, I always had to prove myself. I had to prove why I should be in this position, and I had to prove why I could speak and sit on this committee. And when I was doing it, I was cool. You know, I was doing it, but when I retired, I sat down and I said, hey, somebody else has to do this. But I'm back. And again, I believe in brainwashing. I mean, when we mentor and we talk to these kids, we tell them how great they are, how great they can be. Because there are many, many people that are breaking them down every day. Breaking them down and telling them they are nothing, they have no expectations. Believe it. Brainwash them.
Okay. We've gone past the originally designated time. I'd like to have Doc summarize, but I'd like to make one quick point that I had down here. Unity is the key. Unite in this facility. Unite into one body and be a force. Be a force for good, and then spread it. We talked about it in the song. We have to be the instruments. If we don't, who will? Take it upon yourself. Think through what's been said. Reflect on the words of what he actually documented that is happening and has been happening. I told you what happened to me in 1961. So it was 59. This still goes on today. Children are being ruined, destroyed by some of our educators by not believing in them, believing they're capable. Their conditioning says that they're not capable, and they take that to the classroom, and especially in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grades. We have to influence the people that have those fertile young minds. Don't bring your prejudices to the classroom. Treat that child like the child is yours. Want for them what you want for your own and for yourself. And on that note, I thank panel for your contributions. I wish we'd had another hour or so. And we're going to ask Dr. Goedert for his short summary. We're 15 minutes past the close, and that's on me. Thank you.
I think it still works. Yeah, it will certainly be short because I think everything that's been said already has been extremely powerful and meaningful. Yeah, I think the main thing is, you know, in thinking of race as being socially constructed, that familiarity, creating intimacy amongst one another, really has the power to break down preconceptions and barriers. And so I think that's been reiterated a number of times, and you know, I think that's what I would close on.
All right. And I had the pleasure, just 1 second, yes ma'am, 1 second and then we'll call you. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Goedert a couple weeks ago, and I had started reading some of his writings, and I wasn't prepared to discuss what I had read at the time because I wanted to reread to really get a drift of what he was saying. He uses some powerful language. But once I went back and reflected on what these men had confided in you, I said, I know this experience. I know other guys with this experience. I know tons of people with these experiences. And if we, as the adults, don't somehow put a stop to it, our grandchildren will sit in places like this 20, 30, 40 years from now and discuss, what can we do? We don't know what to do. So it's on us. We know now. We have some marching orders. If you disagree, let it be known to your contemporaries, hey, it's hogwash, I don't buy it, and go off and do what you've been doing. But those who believe that there's some value in what's been said here tonight, spread it abroad. Pastor Mitchell. Well, this little lady here with the white hair has been standing beside me for 50 years. Ma'am?
Oh, my wife, Monica.
Our cousin. Stand up. Monica Mead. Oh. U of M graduate, nursing, and doing now what? What? Yeah, what part of nursing? Cardiac. So even though she's of that other hue, she's still able to use it. And who knows, one of us may rely on her if we have to be shipped to U of M hospital because we have a serious condition. And lastly, there's still people, you see it on the news, it's in the paper, they get an Asian or an Indian doctor come into the room and refuse to let them work on them because of their conditioning. Somebody has convinced them this person is not good enough to work on you because of a different hue. But then if you read, you find that some of our brightest doctors are from India and Asia because they study hard. And that's what I want us to do, is have our children study hard, and let's teach them hard, and let's make them better so that we can make this a shining example of what humanity can do. And thank you to my wife for allowing me to spend this time. Shahida, thank you. And thank you all.